The most boomer thing about me is that I love old movies. I'm talking about black and white films, golden age of Hollywood, and actors using fake transatlantic accents. This video is perfect for those who've always wanted to get into old movies but didn't know where to start. I'll mostly be focusing on movies that are easy to watch, that are fun, have a good story, and have really cute clothes. Many of my recommendations are from the 50s and 60s since I'm just naturally drawn to the eras, the aesthetic, the clothes, and I find the newer a movie is, the easier it is to get into versus like a 1920s black and white silent film. So why should you listen to me? Well, I was a film major for exactly 1 year before I switched out of the program because there was too many men. So call me a fraud if you like, but this list won't be your typical cinephile, snobby, Citizen Kane copy-paste list of film school recs. Before we jump into the recommendations, let's tell you where to watch these. So first up is HBO Max. They have a Turner Classic Movies hub on there. And then we have Criterion streaming service. I'm not currently subscribed to it now, but when I was doing the free trial, there were so many movies. At one point, they had a playlist that was all of Marilyn Monroe's filmography, so I signed up for that specifically. But I know there are a lot of good movies on here, especially international ones as well. And then we have Amazon Prime, Netflix, Mubi, and Tubi. Netflix probably has the least amount of old movies, but I have seen some pop up here and there. Mubi I've never used, but looking at their library, it seems like they have quite an extensive collection. And then we have Tubi, not to be confused with Mubi. So Tubi is like the free version. There's like ads in it. It's really annoying. But if you're on a budget, they do have some movies that I wasn't able to find anywhere. And then my last suggestion is good old YouTube. You can find a lot of older movies and it's like usually the whole thing. But obviously your results may vary and like the quality might differ depending on who's uploading it. But I will say for YouTube, since they have like the demonetization thing for music, it's maybe not the best for any musical movies. But I think there are some random obscure ones that are on YouTube. I don't use it as much just because I like using the other streaming services, but again, good if you are on a budget. Alrighty, so let's get into my recommendations. I have both black and white and color recommendations. Obviously, if you're scared of black and white movies, start with the color ones and kind of work your way backwards. And these will be presented in stream of consciousness order. And for fun, I'm going to be including letterbox reviews to help provide context and humor where needed, because this video probably desperately needs it. Let's begin with the Holy Trinity: Audrey Hepburn, Marilyn Monroe, Grace Kelly. These are three iconic actresses who you've heard about, but maybe never watched any films. But you might be familiar with the Breakfast at Tiffany's imagery or the Marilyn Monroe Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend song. This is actually how I started watching old movies. I thought Audrey Hepburn was iconic before I even watched any of her movies. So let's start with our girl Audrey. My first recommendation is Roman Holiday, the 1953 film directed by William Wyler. It is a fun romance story. It's about Princess Anne, who's on a royal trip to Rome. Obviously, because she's a princess, she has a lot of routine and like things to do, and she's sick of it all. She basically pulls a Princess Jasmine and sneaks out of her room. And here enters Joe Bradley. He's an American reporter. He stumbles upon Princess Anne sleeping on a bench, and basically he figures out that she's the princess, but she doesn't know he's a reporter. He's gonna get close to her and try to get the scoop. And they basically go on a really cute date together. He offers to show her the city, and seeing Audrey Hepburn traverse through Rome in all her really cute outfits just like sends serotonin straight to my brain. This movie is lighthearted, fun. Roman Holiday is one of my favorite comfort watches. It's really fun to watch, and it's just, I don't know, it's just great. The next film I'm going to be talking about is Charade, the 1963 film directed by Stanley Donen. It is a thriller, romance, comedy. The movie starts off in the French Alps. So we have our main character, Regina, who is going to divorce her husband. It's all very chic and iconic. She's wearing Givenchy when she meets a charming American named Peter. And Peter is played by Cary Grant. So we have this woman who realizes she doesn't love her husband, but when she goes back home from her vacation, she finds out that her husband has been murdered, and there's also $250,000 missing. So she has to try to figure out what the hell is happening. Her husband isn't who he said he was. And surprise, surprise, she meets the American again, Peter. So she kind of teams up with him to figure out what's happening. And in the background, there's these mysterious men who show up at her husband's funeral that she doesn't know. And they're all very, very sus. And they are following her. I particularly love this movie a lot because the dialogue is so good. Like, we have Regina dropping all of the one-liners, like very iconic lines. Let's move on to Marilyn Monroe. My first pick is 1959's Some Like It Hot, directed by Billy Wilder. It is a romantic comedy. So we have these two musicians played by Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon who witness a crime and they're running away from the mob's hitmen because they saw stuff that they shouldn't have. And I guess the only viable way to escape is dressing up as women and joining an all-female band who's going on tour. Marilyn plays the lead singer in this band and you do get to see her sing in this movie. Silly hijinks ensue as these men try to blend in and whoops, one of them starts to fall in love with Marilyn Monroe. Because who wouldn't? This movie may have been controversial in its time because you literally have two men literally cross-dressing. And especially with really old movies, they had something called the Hays Code, which was like a list of rules of what could and couldn't be shown. And that meant a lot of the movies were very like PG, rated G. It was certainly different from today. There weren't that many movies in the late 50s that featured cross-dressing as the main plot point. This movie is funny as hell and is a joy to watch. So I had to include this movie because it's the one that launched the Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend scene with that iconic pink dress. And it is a 1953 Gentlemen Prefer Blondes directed by Howard Hawks, and this is a romantic comedy / musical. And be warned, there are a lot of songs. So if you don't like singing, don't watch this. The film follows these two friends who couldn't be any more different. We have Lorelai, the dumb blonde, who only cares about money, and then we have Dorothy, who's the brunette, who's sarcastic and who likes men as long as they're hot. So there's this rich dude who proposes to Lorelai, but his dad doesn't approve because he thinks Lorelai is a gold digger. Both of these girls end up going on a cruise, and it's kind of like a test because rich dude's dad hired a private detective to kind of like prove that she's a gold digger. There's a lot of musical numbers and really fun costumes. We follow their escapades and kind of like meet the different characters on the ship. And yeah, it's really fun to watch two friends run around a ship and just like have a good time. My first entry for Grace Kelly is a 1954 movie directed by Alfred Hitchcock called Rear Window. You may or may not have heard of it. It is a suspense thriller movie starring the iconic Grace Kelly and James Stewart. So we have our main character Jeffries, who's stuck in his apartment and he's bored as hell. His leg's broken, so he has to sit and recover. So like any normal person, he passes the time by spying on his neighbors through his window. Then one day, he notices something very weird happening in the apartment that looks a lot like murder. He ropes in his girlfriend, played by Grace Kelly, to investigate and gather evidence to solve this mystery. This is a super contained movie. It only takes place in like his apartment and like the apartments that he sees across the hall. It's super visual. I find that this movie is really easy to get into because the plot is compelling and I love a good mystery. For my second Grace Kelly entry, I have yet another Alfred Hitchcock movie. Sorry. It is 1955 To Catch a Thief, and this is another romance thriller because apparently that's what I really like. The story is set in the French Riviera. A bunch of jewelry robberies are suddenly happening. We follow Cary Grant, who plays a retired jewel thief. Everyone's blaming it on him, but he's like, no, it's not me. I'm a changed man. So he's trying to set out to clear his name. And he teams up with Frances, who's played by Grace Kelly, to find out who is behind these thefts. This is another one of those movies that's set in like the glamorous European romanticized setting. I would recommend watching this movie just for the costumes alone. Like everything that Grace Kelly wears is so beautiful, and oh my god, so beautiful. I can't even put my thoughts into words because just this movie is just so visually stunning. And now that we're done with the Holy Trinity, I'm gonna move into individual movie recommendations. This next movie is directed by Joseph Mankiewicz. It's the 1950 All About Eve starring Bette Davis. We have Margot, a seasoned Broadway star who's turning 40 years old, which is apparently old as hell in showbiz years. And then we have Eve, who is like a young Broadway hopeful, and she kind of wiggles her way into meeting her. And the story follows these two women who are at like different stages of their career and kind of like how they interact with like the entertainment industry. And then we have Eve, who's trying to make her way to the top. All About Eve is a drama. This movie touches upon ageism, fame and glory, and like good old manipulation. And we got some powerhouse acting, especially from from Betty Davis. And then here we have Betty Davis looking fabulous in costumes designed by the legendary Edith Head. And bonus points, Marilyn Monroe makes a small cameo in this film. Next up, we have a drama romance directed by David Lean. It's the 1955 movie Summertime. This is a great movie to watch if you're experiencing wanderlust because it'll make you really want to travel. The story follows Jane Hudson, who's an American secretary who is basically on her like dream solo trip to Venice, Italy. She like saved up all this money to like go to this beautiful country. There's a lot of gorgeous Technicolor shots of Italy here. And the beginning of the movie is so great because you have the beautiful scenery and like the city, but you have it juxtaposed to Jane Hudson by herself on this trip, and you kind of like feel like that loneliness, like even without saying much you can see that she's lonely, and it's like it's like sad and beautiful at the same time. But as the movie goes on, she meets a hot Italian stranger. The plot is kind of similar to Roman Holiday, where you have someone coming from afar meeting someone hot, and then they go like on a big date together. But this one's a little bit different because it is Katharine Hepburn, and it's a little bit more mature because obviously she's just like a secretary who's not rich, so she's not a princess. I think it's a really good intro to Katharine Hepburn. She obviously deserves a spot in the Holy Trinity, I think, but I personally haven't watched enough of her movies. But I know Katharine Hepburn is really funny and her acting is great. You may have noticed that most of these films that I'm recommending are in English, and I try to keep it that way because I feel like international foreign films are like one step deeper just because you have to read subtitles. I felt like I had to include this one because I feel like it has a lot of cultural relevance. You kind of have something to pull from, and that is Godzilla, the 1954 version, black and white, directed by Ishiro Honda. This film is in Japanese. They do have an American remake that I watched 5 minutes of and turned off because I couldn't, but if you're allergic to subtitles, there's that one, I guess. But I definitely think you should give the Japanese version a try. The thing about Godzilla movies is that there's a lot of them, like a lot. They're literally separated into different eras just because there's so damn many. So I'm gonna make it easy for you and recommend the first one, the original. Because it was made in the 50s, the special effects aren't anything special and might take you out of the movie a little bit, but I think it's definitely a good watch because the original Godzillas are focused on the people and not actually Godzilla, which is so funny because like the modern ones are focused on like the monsters, the destruction and everything. But I love the original one so much. I think you should definitely watch it if you have any interest in Godzilla, even if you've watched the modern ones and liked it. Maybe even if you didn't like the new ones, the old one might be worth watching. If you're still not convinced to watch this movie, the actor who plays Dr. Serizawa is like super hot. If you haven't heard of this next movie, I would be very surprised, but it definitely deserves a spot on this list because I just watched it and I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. It is the 1952 musical romantic comedy directed by Stanley Donen and Gene Kelly, and that is Singing in the Rain. This is a movie about movies. It takes place during the golden age of Hollywood when movies were transitioning from like silent films to what they call talkies, so like with voice added on. We have these two actors, Don and Lena. They're silent movie stars. They're really famous. Everyone loves them. They're fake dating for the press. The movie studios are trying to deal with this transition. And Lena has a very interesting voice, probably not suited for the talkies. Things also get complicated when Don meets a woman named Kathy and he starts to fall for her instead. Be warned, this is a musical. So if you don't like singing or dancing, there's a lot of it in here. The dancing is really, really good because obviously you have Gene Kelly. It's truly a whirlwind of a movie that's a feast for the eyes and ears. I put off watching it for so long and I don't know why, because when I watched it, I was like pleasantly surprised that it was like funnier and wittier than I expected. There's a Letterboxd review that sums this movie up perfectly. Women Be Gossipin', the movie. This is the 1939 drama comedy directed by George Cukor, and it's appropriately titled The Women. My favorite part of this movie is that there's literally no men. On screen, in the background, nobody. It's just all women all the time, and that's it. So we follow a friend group of these rich Manhattan society ladies. We have trash husband number 1 who cheats on his wife, Mary. Someone in the friend group finds out this juicy drama from their manicurist, and it kind of spreads around, so like almost everyone in the group knows except for poor Mary. But when she finds out, she decides to get a damn divorce and leave his ass, and she goes to a ranch in Reno, Nevada to get an annulment. The other woman who the trash husband cheated on his wife with, she gets kind of pulled into the story and gets entangled within like everyone's like relationships. So it's super juicy. There's a lot of catty banter. The lines are spectacular. In the middle of the movie, there's also a fashion show scene that fashion girlies will love, love, love. If this movie sounds interesting to you, but you can't get over that it's in black and white, there's actually a 1956 remake in Technicolor called The Opposite Sex. I watched that one first, so I'm not a purist or anything, but the movies are a little bit different. I do like the costumes and coloring more of the 1956 version because you can actually tell like who's who because they dress them in certain colors and certain shapes. So it's like, it's easier to tell them apart versus the black and white one. You're kind of like, who is that? The big downside to the remake is that they included men in the movie, which is very unfortunate. And then they kind of have more of a role, which is kind of annoying because like I don't care about them at all. My last recommendation is the 1958 movie called Belle, Book and Candle, directed by Richard Quinn. It is a romantic comedy movie starring Kim Novak and James Stewart. But it involves witches. Gillian is a witch living in New York City, and she runs an ethnological art shop. She has a Siamese cat named Pyewacket, who seriously steals the show, like best character of the movie. Shep moves into the building and becomes her new neighbor, and Gillian casts a spell to get him to fall in love with her. But there's a theory in this world that if a witch falls in love, she loses her powers. And it's kind of like a will she, won't she fall in love kind of thing. There's also a subplot where an author magically comes into town and is doing everything in his power to expose the witch's coven in this area. I'm including this movie because I love any movie featuring witches, and I thought it'll be a fun addition to this that's still within the vein of like a fun romantic comedy. One note, the age gap between the two actors is a little bit weird because you can fully see that he's like really old and she's really young, which is typical in a lot of older movies. But if you ignore that, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's a really good watch. There are a lot of captivating, beautiful shots in this movie, which is not surprising because James Wong Howe did the cinematography. You should definitely watch this movie if you like witches and kind of like that vintage retro aesthetic, because this movie checks off both boxes. So that's it. That's the list. So my camera ran out of space on the memory card, so you don't get to see me. I have all of these movies on my Letterboxd. Follow me there if you want to see some thirsty and dumb reviews of random movies. But I hope you enjoyed this list. I hope it gave you a lot of ideas of what you could watch. And I think as you watch more old movies, you'll kind of figure out what you like, whether it's like the genre, the time period, the different actors, and you can kind of let that guide where you're going to go next. I think you can go a lot of different directions here. You can dive deep into specific directors, like watching all of Alfred Hitchcock's movies. I think everything I've watched from him has been really good so far. Or more intermediate/advanced director, you can start going into Kurosawa and a bunch of like foreign films. I think those are a little bit harder to get into, especially if you're not used to black and white movies or just older movies in general. And obviously, if you like a certain actor, you can just watch the rest of their work. Like Audrey Hepburn has a ton of movies. Marilyn Monroe's filmography is interesting because you can see her being put in the dumb blonde stereotype, and you can see her struggling and trying to transition in the latter part of her career. Or you could even go through different eras, like the 50s and 60s. Like, again, if you find that you like the aesthetic of a certain time period, there's so many good movies out there, and obviously a lot of bad ones. But I think that's the fun in watching these old movies, like finding hidden gems or watching a popular movie and being like, that was really good. Or on the flip side, watching it and be like, I think it's kind of overrated. And I feel like it's cool to say like, oh yeah, I have watched these old movies that everyone has talked about and referenced time and time again. I could talk about this for hours, days, and my voice hurts right now because I've been talking for like 2 hours, I think. If you have any specific recommendations or like specific lists that you would like to see, just let me know. Like and subscribe, I guess, if you want. Only if you want. And I will talk to you next time.